Two balls and a strike to count on Taylor. Reyes fires, swinging a drive, deep left field. It's his way back. Walk the ball. Chris Taylor.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by Justin Lorber, and Justin is here because we are recapping the draft. Justin and I, if you missed it, went live on night one, right when the Dodgers made their first pick, Dalton, rushing catcher out of Louisville, who we'll talk a little bit more now. But now with all 20 rounds in the books, a little bit of time to dig into some of these guys who, coming out of high school, played at junior colleges or smaller colleges, whatever it might be. We're excited to be here. So, Justin, again, I say it every time. I know you love the draft. How does it feel to be on the other side of it?
I mean, it's fun that, we have like a new group of guys. Really, when you're a fan of a team that's been in contention for like the past decade straight, there are really only 2 times of the year that you get new prospects. And it's the draft, the international signing deadline. And the international guys are much younger, they won't even be seen at like the affiliates, for another couple of years. So the draft is fun because these guys will come into the system. They'll start playing games, hopefully in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and you get to start tinkering with your with your prospect rankings, right? As soon as we start getting information on some of these guys.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, let me ask you this first. Big picture. I mean, I know you and I are very much in alignment in that we have an incredible amount of trust and belief in the Dodgers scouting, player development, et cetera, et cetera. And so when it comes to saying, like, what do we think about the draft class? In general, if the Dodgers thought these guys were good picks, we're going to default to trusting them on that. But from your perspective, as somebody who does dig into this a little bit, talks to people, researches a little bit, big picture, and we're going to get philosophically into some changes, but what do you think about this class as a whole?
I think it's interesting. I think it's really interesting because, if you look back, not just to the last 2 years when they've gone pretty pitcher heavy, not just at the top of the draft, but throughout the draft, but even like the other drafts under Billy Gasparino, they haven't gone like with this many college hitters at the top of the draft ever. They've taken guys like Cody Hosey and Michael Busch, both first-round picks back in 2019, Jaron Kendall and Connor Wong, first and third-round picks back in 2017. So they've taken college hitters high, but in this number, the first however many picks at the top of the draft, I think it's really interesting from a developmental perspective because on the other side, they haven't taken as many college hitters in the draft, and the majority of their top offensive prospects are international guys. You've got Michael Busch and Jacob Amaya and James Outman, and then guys like Diego Cartaya, Jose Ramos, Yorbit Vivas, Alex DeJesus, Eddie Leonard, and then the new international guys that are in the ACL right now, like Wilman Diaz and Rain Donson and Jesus Jalise. So really, I think it's the offensive development has been a little more on the international side. So I'm interested to see what this group does as a whole and individually in their development paths.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, Will Smith, another guy that maybe, was a college hitter that they took early on. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, it seems like as you list off those names, not necessarily as much success as you would have hoped for at the college hitter level. Like, do you think that's a fair assessment? Some of the guys, Jaron Kendall, Cody Hosey, are guys that, they seemingly have missed on to some degree, whereas when you look at some of the pitchers they've taken high, it feels like there's a better track record there.
Yeah, I think, especially over the last 2 years, they've taken a ton of pitchers and they've done really, really well with those pitchers. Bobby Miller is one of the best pitching prospects in baseball. Landon Knack and Clayton Beeter are both in Double-A and look like, legit prospects. Gavin Stone, who was taken in the 5th round of that draft, which was the shortened draft, so that was the last round. He is a legitimate, top 100 prospect and one of the best pitchers in the system. I think there's an argument for him as the best pitcher in the system right now, if you were to make it. And then, last year went really pitcher heavy. Two prep arms they took at the top, Maddox Bruns and Pierre Hubeck, both look like solid pitches for now, but obviously those guys are going to take longer to develop and it'll take a while before we, can figure out, how good those pitches were. But the early returns on some other guys like Nick Destrini and Emmett Sheehan, both college arms in the 4th and 6th round, those guys have been really good. Ronan Kopp, who was a junior college arm taken in the 12th round, early returns on him are very good. He's been pitching probably better than not probably, he has been pitching better than Bruns or Hubeck at low A. He's been really strong. They were able to get him on day 3. So considering how well they've done with arms, I was a little surprised to see them go bat heavy. But who knows? This will be kind of a fun new group for the Dodgers player development guys to bring in and work with.
Yeah, and let's get into that. We're going to get into some individual names here in just a second, but you kind of pointed this out, and we were talking right before this. Last year, they had 19 picks. They took 17 pitchers, just 2 hitters, and one of the 2 they didn't even end up being able to sign. This year, their first 7 picks are hitters. 15 of the 19 are hitters overall. I joked with Rob Hill, minor league pitching coordinator for the Dodgers, who's been on the show. I said, man, must be a bad day for Rob Hill because none of these guys are coming in, and he said, that's all right, we got some dogs. But do you think this was just how the board fell, so to speak? Do you think the Dodgers, you always take best player available, but you also talk about the Dodgers system. It's loaded on a pitching side. It feels like the offensive side of the prospect tree is a little bit leaner than the pitching side. Do you think this is just how the board fell, or when you look at this, do you see a trend and say there might have been a philosophical sort of emphasis on this year's class?
I don't know if there was, because I'm not the right person to ask on like what is this draft class like, 600 players. At the top of the draft, it was a hitter-heavy draft.
Okay.
There were some pitchers who went earlier than expected, but at the top of the class and in the first, 20 picks, this was an offensive-heavy draft at both the high school and the college level. But beyond that, it's hard for me to say, so I don't know if this was some philosophical change. I always assume that they're going to go best player available, with the context of, slot values and, who fits their development profile well, also added in. But no, I don't see like a philosophical change. Yeah. And I also think it's interesting because I don't think you can put all of these hitters in one particular bucket. It's like they drafted this type of hitter.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting. They have some different profiles as well that they brought in. There's not like a clear archetype of hitter that they went after either.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up, because last year it was pitchers that could throw at the top of the zone, spin, velocity, that kind of stuff. This year, it's interesting. I mean, maybe shortstop is the archetype. Eight shortstops selected. Shortstop. Some of these guys won't end up playing shortstop, but, does that qualify as the archetype? If you're a catcher, 2 of the first 10 picks were catchers. They drafted 8 shortstops overall. Maybe that was the archetype?
Maybe. And I think the other thing is, you're drafting those guys because they play in the middle of the field and they have more room to work on the defensive spectrum if and when they go down. And a lot of them will move down the defensive spectrum as they age and as they climb the minor league ladder, if they climb the minor league ladder. And then, of course, one of them, Christopher Campos, their 7th round pick we can get into, 2-way player at St. Mary's. I've heard a lot more about him as a pitcher than as a hitter. So maybe he's a pitcher, maybe he's a hitter. We'll find out soon. But yeah, a lot of shortstops.
Yeah, it's a good point. Shortstop, theoretically, the best defensive player in most teams, shortstop or center field. And so if you're a shortstop that can't stick at shortstop, there's a lot of places to go. If you're a left fielder that can't stick in left field, that's a problem because there's really not anywhere else to put that guy. Okay, let's get into the individuals. You and I talked a bit about Dalton rushing. First pick the Dodgers had, 40th overall, first pick in the 2nd round. Catcher out of Louisville. Now that we're a few days removed from the draft, has anything changed? Do you feel better about this pick? Do you feel the same about this pick? Any new information or numbers that you've seen that are encouraging to you?
I do think a little bit better. This is a Dodgers archetype of hitter. There's power, there's high exit velocities, there's patience. He'll take his walks. He doesn't chase out of the zone. So this is a Dodgers type of hitter. And then it comes from a guy who, the Dodgers believe will stay behind the plate. I think he probably has a decent shot of staying behind the plate, especially if the electronic strike zone gets introduced, as a lot of people think it will. But he's also played some first base, so he might get some time there as well. It's another way for him to get his at bats. And with the National League having the DH now, you can have 2 catchers who can be in a starting lineup. If they're good enough to hit, you can play them at DH, you can play them at first base, you can play them elsewhere if they can play elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so moving down to the Dodgers' 2nd, 3rd, and 4th pick, but 3rd through 5th round guys. We've got Alex Freeland, shortstop out of Central Florida, Nick Biddison, an outfielder out of Virginia Tech, and Sean McClain, a shortstop from Arizona State. All these guys in the late end of their 20-year-old year, beginning of their 21-year-old year. Biddison almost 22, but any of those 3 guys jump out to you? Obviously, these are the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th pick the Dodgers got to make in this draft, so these are guys that you have some hope for from a prospect perspective that there's a decent chance they could turn into something.
I think of those 3, Freeland is the fun one for me. He was a pretty highly rated prep player back in the 2020 draft, went to school. He's a draft eligible sophomore, so he's not yet 21. If he had been born just like 10 days later, he wouldn't even be eligible for this draft. So, and if the draft were in June instead of July, like it had been for most of the last few decades, he also wouldn't be eligible for this draft based on his birthday. So he got lucky. Draft is in July, and he, just barely beat the cutoff, draft eligible sophomore. So he was eligible this year. A guy who, decent hit tool. The power hasn't really come out yet in games, even though there's probably some more raw power in there because he's a 6'2" guy. He's got a strong frame. He's a switch hitter. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Dodgers were able to get some more of that raw power out into his game power. And a guy who could be an above average hitter and an above average power hitter as well from a position in the middle of the field or maybe even third base.
Of these first few picks, Rushing, Freeland, Biddison, McLean, I mean, where do these guys fit in your mind on the slotting scale? Are any of these guys over slot guys, or are these guys that they maybe save a little bit of money to get, maybe their 6th round pick, who we'll talk about in a moment, the first high schooler that they grabbed?
If there's an overslot guy out of those 4, I would be pretty sure that it's Freeland because the age and, him having another 2 years left of college as well.
Okay. Moving to the 6th through the 10th round, we've got Logan Wagner, a shortstop. This was their first high school pick, committed to Louisville, so they're going back to the Louisville pipeline, even if they haven't actually been to Louisville. Christopher Campos, who you mentioned, listed as a shortstop in some places, potentially a pitcher out of St. Mary's. Taylor Young, a second baseman out of Louisiana Tech. Brandon Neek, this was their first pitcher, lefty, out of Virginia. And then in the 10th round, Simon Reed, their second catcher, this one out of Westmont. So local kid there. I mentioned Wagner, the first high schooler. I'm guessing he might be an overslot guy. Campos, shortstop / pitcher. Neek, the first pitcher they drafted. Maybe the second pitcher they drafted. We don't know. But what do you make of that crew?
Well, yeah, you're right. Wagner is probably the overslot guy. He's a bat first infielder. So he's listed as a shortstop, but, I'm not sure he ends up staying there, if and when he gets to the major leagues, but he could play some second base, could play some third base, might play a little shortstop too. But a guy who I think, should stay somewhere in the infield, and offense is probably the exciting part of that profile as well. And, it seems like he is going to sign based on his social media. So looks like they're going to be able to get him away from Louisville before he even goes there.
Was he a guy that was expected to go earlier as a high school guy? Like, were any of these guys sort of like, hey, this guy was actually a top 150 guy and the Dodgers got him at 250 or something like that?
So he was ranked decently high by a couple publications. I know Baseball America and Prospects Live both had him in like their top 150 or so.
Okay.
But once you get past like the top high school guys, the rankings can really vary.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So because those guys are so young, there's still a lot to project there. But I think definitely an exciting guy who certainly could have been taken higher based on, those publications. I'm sure there were teams who had him as like a 4th round or a 3rd round bat, but he ends up going in the 6th round, should be overslot, and it looks like they're going to be able to get him away from school.
Great. Campos, Young, Neek, Reed, any of those guys jump out at you?
From what I've heard, and I've only heard really much about Campos on the pitching side, but it's exciting. He hasn't thrown a whole lot of innings. I think it's like 15 innings the last year. But he played shortstop. He pitched a little bit. He's listed as a shortstop. It seems like they're going to make him a pitcher. Just based on what I've heard, it's like the exciting parts of his profile are as a pitcher. It's a fastball with plus vertical movement. You've got some athleticism, obviously, as a former shortstop. But we'll see whether that ends up being official. They haven't said anything officially on what he's going to be.
Okay. Moving on to the 11 to 20 range. One of the themes of this draft in general was the son of famous baseball players. The Dodgers got into that. They didn't get to at the top of the draft. In the 11th round, they draft Kyle Nevin, son of Phil Nevin, current whatever they're calling the Angels manager nowadays. He is an outfielder out of Baylor. We got Jacob Meter, right-hander out of Dallas Baptist. Chris Newell, outfielder out of Virginia. Jose Izara, junior college player from Florida. Nicholas Perez, high schooler, shortstop. Then Jared Karos, the guy we'll talk about. That last name will sound familiar to a bunch of Dodger fans. Eric Karros' son, UCLA, pitcher out of UCLA. Peyton Martin, pitcher out of East High School, committed to East Carolina. Cameron Decker, a shortstop, high school shortstop, committed to Central Florida. Chris Alien, a outfielder from Maryland. And then Carter McCulley, another high schooler, committed to play junior college baseball, it looks like, in Florida. So a lot of names there. Again, we know the 11 through 20 range, you're not like banking on any of these guys becoming future all-stars, future top prospects. And yet, if you're a Dodgers fan, it feels like one of these guys is going to be a stud in 2 years because that's just what the Dodgers do.
Yeah, they've had a lot of success in the back half of the draft over the last few years, guys who've made the major leagues from, either the back of day 2 or, somewhere on day 3. They've used those guys in trades. And, they have a few guys last year who right now look like solid investments from day 3. So
yeah,
one of these guys, who knows?
So Karos is the guy that's been getting the most attention, and I think it's important to point out it's for 2 reasons. Yes, because he's Eric Karos, Dodger legend's son, but also because there's a lot of people that seem to say, take away the last name Karos, there's a lot to like for where the Dodgers got him. This is a guy that, if not for a couple injuries, might have been much, much higher on draft boards. Instead, the Dodgers get him at the back half in the 16th round. You've got to think that it's the Dodgers. They talk to Eric Karos, who's an employee of the team to some degree, that there's some sort of agreement of, if we're going to take him, there's a pretty good chance they can get him to sign. We don't know that for sure, but let's talk about Karos really quickly. Do you like him as much as it seems like a number of the prospect people I follow, baseball draft people that I follow tend to like him?
I do. I think it's a great pick, especially for day 3. And I think it was the LA Times, and it was Jack Harris who put out an article on him this morning. And he's had experience with the Dodgers. He's worked out with Brandon McDaniel, their strength coach, as he's been rehabbing from his back injury, which has caused him to miss half of 2021 and all of 2022. So he hasn't pitched in a game since, over a year, like wow, 15 months. But if you were healthy, yeah, this is a guy who easily should have gone on day 2, 10 rounds higher, maybe even 4th, 5th, or 6th round. A guy who might have been UCLA's Friday night starter, which is the equivalent of the college ace. So getting him, and if he's able to get fully healthy, I think there are some exciting tools there. He's a big guy, he's lanky, he's 6'7". So even though the velocity isn't premium right now, definitely a guy who can put on some weight. There's projectability there for more velocity. Fastball is exciting metrics. It comes from a pretty high slot. So we'll see if they want to change and play around with that. I know one person I follow suggested that, he's the perfect guy to shift to a sinker because of the high release. But yeah, this is a legit arm, especially if he's healthy. And the Dodgers are taking a chance on guys with some health issues before that dropped, even though their talent, was better than the spot they were picked at. And he might be another one of those guys.
Okay, and he's a pitcher, so unlike his dad, we don't have to watch him try and run around the bases too much uncomfortably, and who knows, maybe a little bit more athletic than his dad, 6'7", you never know. But anybody else from that 11 through 20 range? Again, Kyle Nevin, the son of Phil Nevin, just because his dad's famous doesn't mean we need to talk about him, but any of those other names, couple, 3 or 4 high school guys, a couple more pitchers in there, anybody that jumps out to you?
Yeah, Jacob Meador, probably my favorite pick in the Dodgers draft. The only pick where that's the guy I would have taken at that pick. And I might have said this earlier. I said it on our show earlier this week. There's a reason I'm not in charge, but I love the pick. He's a smaller right-hander, but really low release fastball with plus vertical movement, and low to mid-90s fastball. He's got a breaking ball. He's got a changeup. Exciting arm. I think someone who easily should have gone, went in the 12th, so 6-7 rounds higher. Taken in the 5th. I wouldn't have shocked me at all. But he off the 12th, the Dodgers get him. I think that's a great pick, not just because of the player, but I also think, it's a good developmental fit as well. Him having a lot of traits that the Dodgers usually look for in hitters. So excited for that. Nicholas Perez, who I would assume is going to be a backup pick because he was fairly highly rated by a lot of publications, and who I wasn't aware of before the draft, but he's out of Puerto Rico. He's a Florida State commit. He's still 17, so he's not yet even 18 years old. So there's a lot of value there. I wouldn't be surprised if he's a backup pick if one of their day 1 overslot guys doesn't sign. I would guess he's going to school, but if he does sign, that's really good value in the 15th round because quite a few rankings that I saw had him much higher than that.
Got it. Yeah, no, I mean, I love, when you talk about Meador, the pitcher out of Dallas Baptist, I just love the thing about the baseball draft is the smaller school piece. Because with baseball, as long as guys have the ability to track velocity and spin and those types of things, the Dodgers and teams like them don't really care about who they're pitching against, because if you throw 98 at the top of the zone with the right spin metrics and that type of stuff, then that's all they care about. Like, in some cases, they're not even too concerned about the results. Of course, results help. So I love looking down this list. You know, in the NFL draft, you know all the picks. This one, we've got a kid from Central Florida. We've got a kid from St. Mary's. We've got a kid from Westmont. We've got a kid from Dallas Baptist. We've got a junior college player. We've got, so just going down. I just love that about the baseball draft, that guys come from, anywhere. I don't know how much you know. A couple guys, it seems like they've signed undrafted free agent wise. I don't have that information in front of me, but either of those two guys, especially, last I saw it was 2. I might be wrong on that. We're also recording this on Thursday. Anything you know about those guys or things that excite you?
So it's 3 as of now.
Okay.
I have down 3. Connor Godwin is a junior college pitcher at the College of Central Florida. He played a little bit in the draft league this summer as well. Carter Lohman is a lefty from Louisville. Has been a starter, has been a reliever. And then Levon Reynoso, who's a third baseman from Tennessee Wesleyan. He's played with the Savannah Bananas, which a lot of people might know, just they're big on TikTok and social media for their antics. He's older, he's 23, but 32 homers this year. He led the NAIA, so obviously it's not D1, but big power, supposedly throws pretty hard on the mound. He threw 15 innings and struck out 27 guys. As a pitcher, supposedly fastball into the mid to upper 90s. So older guy, but certainly interesting. We'll see. I wouldn't expect, I wouldn't, say, oh, well, he's undrafted, the Dodgers signed him, so this guy's going to turn out to be great. We don't know. If he wasn't drafted, obviously there's a reason for it, but the Dodgers are signing him. There's also a reason for that. So
yeah. All right. I love it. And my last question was going to be your favorite pick, but I think you already answered it. All together is Meter in the 12th round, pick number 375, the righty out of Dallas Baptist. Was that your favorite pick of the draft for the Dodgers?
Yeah, definitely. And I wanted to say Dallas Baptist is a great program. So obviously a much smaller school.
Yeah.
They're not, especially in Texas. They're not Texas or Texas A&M or, even like Rice, which has a historically great baseball program, or a school like Baylor. But Dallas Baptist is a really strong baseball program. They produce MLB draft picks year after year.
Love it. Love it. All right.
Program too into another strong development program.
It's great. Yeah, and again, we're going through this. Some of these guys reportedly have signed. Some of them we have no idea. 19 total draft picks, but again, no guarantee that all 19. I think the Dodgers signed all but 2 players last year from their draft class, and so we'll see. We'll keep updating you as things go along and we get a sense of who's actually signing and who's not signing. Because again, we could be sitting here and saying, look at all these guys we love, and if 6 of them don't end up signing, the draft class is going to look a lot different. And on the flip side, you mentioned a guy like Nicholas Perez in the 15th round. If somehow the Dodgers can sign him without losing somebody up above him, then maybe you feel a lot stronger about this draft class. So we'll see. So Justin, we appreciate your time. We appreciate your research, that type of stuff. And as soon as some of these guys start getting slotted into your draft prospects, let us know. All right?
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. As always, be sure to subscribe, ring the notification bell here on YouTube. If you're listening via podcast, please follow, subscribe, rate, review. We would greatly appreciate it. You can check out Justin's stuff at Future Dodgers on Twitter, futuredodgers.com as well. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks as always.